I'm Alison from Bag Lady Bird Learn to Sew. Today we are doing the final part of the December 2020 sew along, Tailors Ham and Seam Roll. Yes, so keep watching and I'll show you how. If you remember from the video before, we used a double pin to indicate the stop and start points of our stitching, and we've got all the layers together. So I've got a short stitch length, of 2. Which will, number one, make it much easier to get around the curves, but also will minimise the risk of any of your stuffing coming out. And if you remember when we did the seam allowance, we allowed, gave yourself a centimetre. So I'm following a centimetre seam allowance. I am doing a good old back tack there. And coming round and stitching this. So I've back tacked several times because it's really annoying if your stitches start coming undone at your opening when you're trying to stuff it. So slowing right down on these tight corners and just coming around. This corner, and again you don't want a hole here, so make sure you go off the edge backwards and forwards a few times as well, and then you can trim your threads down. So I've sewn with a turquoise blue thread because it makes it easier for you to see what I am doing. However, you will be sewing in a thread similar to the fabric you are using. So we're doing the other end now. So put my needle in the down position, reverse backwards, come forwards. So a few times reversing, and then we're following around with a seam allowance of 1 centimetre. Making sure I'm removing the pins as I go. You don't want to sew over the pins and give yourself any issues. And as we come down to the double pin, we know that's our indicator that this is where we stop sewing. And a few backwards and forwards to secure it. Now at this point you have got the option to just go around and restitch over your first row of stitching. Again, just gives you a really secure stitch line. You don't want your stitches to come undone and all your stuffing end up all over your beautiful garments that you're sewing. Of stitching as close as you can, and the same on the other end as well. And start sewing here. So we're still with a stitch length of 2. Doing the same. What this will do will give you really strong seam and reduce the risk of it splitting. Okay, so that is our seam roll stitched in place, and now we are doing the Tailors Ham. So we're doing the Tailors Ham, Again, we've got the double pin indicating the start-stop point. Sorry, I'm knocking the camera there when I'm turning the hand wheel. Okay, so first, strengthen that starting edge, and then we come around and we're stitching with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. All the way around our little tailor's ham. So I gave you the measurements that I have made with my little tailor's ham, but you have the option to make whatever size or shape you want that will help you with the type of pressing you do most often. So if you need to create something that's got smaller, tighter curves, you can make a smaller one. You do not have to be bound by the measurements that I have given to you. You know, pressing tools are just that, they are tools, and if you need something that's shaped differently, make something that's shaped differently. Make your life when you're pressing as easy as possible. So we're coming round again to the double pin, and we're doing our reversing forward and back like so, chopping threads, and now we're going to go around and stitch the same again to secure those stitches to make a super strong seam. And you don't need to watch me do all this, do you? Okay, so that is the last part of sewing machine use for this. So we're going to trim the seam allowance now down to approximately half. Doesn't need to be an accurate measurement, you just want to reduce some of that bulk around those seams. Obviously we've got 4 layers there, can make it a little bulky. You can see where my sewing was not as accurate as it should have been, but it is accurate enough to strengthen the seam to give you that bit more. So we'll leave the full seam allowance here at the opening part. Do the same on the seam roll, trim down your seam allowance. Again, leave your full seam allowance at the opening part, and this is where you want to now start clipping little triangles into your seam allowance. So you don't want to do all the layers at once. So I've just got my little scissors and I'm clipping triangles, and I'm doing the top layers, so the first 2. And what this does, these little triangles that I'm snipping out, allow this to sit here and not add any extra bulk or puckers. If you haven't watched my video on sewing beautiful curved seams, that will give you more information on this. I will tag to that in the comments below as well. So we're going all the way around both of these. The tighter the curve, the closer together your little snips need to be. And on your straight edges, where it's a straight line, you don't need to do any little snips at all. It's only on the curves. Okay, so I'm going to do the other 2 layers, and the idea is that you stagger them slightly so that they're not in exactly the same place as on the other side. So if I just do it like this, so what you don't want to do is weaken the area too much so you've got too little there, but just all the way around this curve and then on the other end of the curve, and then we'll come back and I'll show you turning these 2 shapes through. So here on the egg we'll be going at the egg, just because it looks really like an egg. Around this end, curves, be leaving this bit intact, and again around this bit. And my snips will be less close together, more spaced out around this wider curve, and the tighter curve will not be as tightly spaced as around this one, but will be more than this end. One thing I did want to say is if you use the very tip of your scissors, okay, so when you are cutting your little snips, if you use the very tip of your scissors, there is much less risk of you going through and accidentally cutting your seam line, whereas if you use the length of the blade, there is much more risk of you just slipping and snipping through your seam line. However, if you do cut through your seam line by accident and cut your stitches, you just need to go back and repair the section where you did and just come a little bit shallower. You might get a slightly unsymmetrical tailor's ham or seam roll, but that's no bad thing because that will give you more options for different shapes of seams. Okay, so you can see on the tailor's ham I have just gone through all the layers together. It was a bit more fiddly to do individual layers because I trimmed away a bit more of the seam allowance. So now we are ready to turn this through. So remember, at your opening, open it out, you've got 2 layers on each side. So regardless of whether, like me, you have done one side decorative and one side plain, or whether you've done the whole thing in calico or you've done all the same fabric, it doesn't matter. You just need to make sure you've got 2 layers on each side and just turn that through and bag it out. So this is where we begin to see our tailor's ham coming together. You want to use your finger, and you can see I've got my middle finger and I'm just smoothing that along the seams all the way around, and that just ensures that your seams are pushed right out, so you've got the edge of that seam right to the edge, because it's important. You don't want to have your seams tucked in and not fully spaced out. So there we go. Once you've done this, your curves should sit smooth. They shouldn't be staggered or in what's the word? Lots of straight lines. They should be a nice, smooth, gentle curve all the way around there. It should look smooth, basically. Okay, so we've got my seam roll here, and it's exactly the same technique. One end first, bring that through, and again, just smoothing these stitches, smoothing your seam from the wrong side with your thumb or your finger, just to make sure that that edge is fully pushed out, like so, and then we can turn the other edge through. You can use a tool to poke inside. I find it's much easier to be more dexterous with my fingers than it is with a tool. So I will tend to use my hands wherever possible. And there we go. So we have our little pockets ready for stuffing. Okay, so I've got an old cereal box here and I've made myself a funnel. Just trim it down around the top here as well. So this can be placed into the opening. I need a bigger opening here to get the sawdust wood shavings through. So if you've purchased your wood shavings sawdust from a pet shop, you will probably find it comes in a really closely compacted brick. I would suggest that you decant it into something else and loosen the stuff off so that you've got loose sawdust. So we're gonna, one bit at a time, drop it into our funnel and so you like sieving it in, pushing it down with your funnel. Make sure your opening of your funnel is big enough. For it all to go in. So you're going to need far more of this wood shavings than you would ever imagine. Whenever you're stuffing something, to get it as solid as you need. You need far more stuffing. So moving all that sawdust down to one end and compacting as much as possible before resuming. So I'm doing a really slow pour. I can direct. The rest of it. Okay, so you can see I've still got a lot of space here. It's starting to get there, but I'm gonna fill up my little pot and keep on pouring. Stage I've kind of abandoned my little filter funnel. I can see the tailor's ham is beginning to take shape. So I've just put what I think has to be the final bit of stuffing in. We are pretty jam-packed here. And now okay, so I'm doubling the thread, threading the needle, double knot. Everything on this seam needs to be around strength. Okay, so I'm going to thread this through from inside, bringing it up where the stitches start. So that the knot should be hidden inside. We don't want that outside. So what I'm going to do is really small ladder stitch. Get rid of that. Hit that. So ladder stitch goes in on one side and slides along the folded edge and then up. So we're going to go in here and slide along that folded edge. So what you get is a little join . So we go in here and along a little. And then in the other side. Along a little. And I'll do it loosely so you can see the effect of what happens. Sorry about the banging in the background. See, if you get a loop happening, just pull that through. Trying to remove any bits of the wood shavings that are in there as well. So we go in, slide the needle along that folded edge and up again. And if you look now, I'm going to just pull on this thread, which should close up that section. And we're just working our way along the open edges with a ladder stitch. You can see there why it's called a ladder. You can see that ladder starting to form. Do another. This is the sort of sewing where I feel like I'm a surgeon. So we then pull that closed pull it tight. There we go. And just the last little bit to finish up. And each stitch I'm doing here, I'm sliding the needle along only a couple of millimetres, not very far at all. Keep those gaps between the stitches as small as we possibly can. Don't want our stuffing escaping. It's taken us a long time to get all that stuffing in. Okay. So you can see now, or I can see, that I am back to where the seam starts. So I have tied a knot in my thread. Okay. So I'm just going to do few stitches here. So pull thread through. Make sure you pull those loops through. You want it nice and firm and as discreet as possible. So we'll snip that end. So here we have it, a little seam roll. So what this means is you can come and press on this. So you could put your seam on top of your seam roll and touch this with the iron, and you would only be pressing the seam itself. You wouldn't be pressing any of the surrounding shapes. That's why it needs to be quite small, your seam roll. It can also be useful for putting inside sleeves and pressing your sleeve seams as well. So that is our seam roll finished. And now I will just finish up the what's it called? Tailors ham. Finish up the tailors ham as well. Squidge it so it's as even as it can be. Okay, and then I will show you a little bit of pressing with our new pressing tools. Let's have a look at the seam roll sausage first. How do we? There. So if you were pressing a seam of a fabric that had nap, for example velvet, I know some of you are making velvet dresses for Christmas, whatever, so you just wanted to press this seam, you don't want to flatten the nap. Pressing on your seam roll will allow that to happen. So you're literally just pressing the bit that touches because of the shape of the curve. So that is for your seam roll. And you'll also be able to use this inside sleeves and anything small like that, so you can get inside to press your seams really nicely. So then, just looking at your tailor's ham, you can then use this shape to press lovely curves on your tailor's ham. So great for darts or curved seams, anything like that. You just want to sort of move the ham about to find the best shape and just place your fabric on there and then press. And it helps you to press nice curves onto the point of your darts, so you get a nice curve shape around the bust. So have fun with your new pressing tools. Let me know how you get on, and I'd love to see your versions too, so share them in the Facebook group.